Hello YouTube. So I don't know how to edit. Plan on going back and doing all my editing later, but I just want to keep pumping out videos for now because I'm enjoying doing this. So I have a policy proposition for the right wing. I don't have any citations for this because I'll tell you why later. The thing I want to do with my channel, and I keep saying this over and over, is one of the things is I want to emulate the policy crafting process and bring it to an open source format of YouTube, where professionals and political minds from across the political spectrum can throw out and debate with me or add new ideas or scrutinize or bring up forgotten ideas from the past as examples we can use. And I just want to, again, open source this to as many minds as possible, get as much diversity of input as possible. So I made a video for the left wing, and I don't know if I like it that much. I might record it again without the rebuttal to Sam Seder, but it had parts about basically the left wing being toxic, and the right wing is also toxic. So I don't think that I'm leaving that out intentionally and just attacking one side. I just didn't like how that video turned out. I tried to do too much with it. It ended up being too long, bloated, and again, two different topics that didn't mesh well together. So I have a policy proposal for the right wing, and it's kind of short-term beneficial to the right wing. In the long term, it could actually be beneficial to both parties, and I try to add things in here to appeal to both the left and the right generally, and several of these smaller factions that are underneath these broad terms of left and right. This video will be dedicated to just policy, no callouts, no sexy YouTube clickbait, just purely my ideas and some questions I need addressed before this could be even considered a practical solution to anything. I would like to eventually talk to economists, someone in charge of zoning and housing policies for cities, people in charge of the policy making process in government, and involved in financial offices, budgeting for government, and kind of just get a mock policy proposal finely tuned, and maybe even something we could implement here in real life. That would be a really cool hobby, I think. So my policy idea I'm kind of calling depopulation zones right now, but it's a working title. It's just also up for debate. So we're going to get into depopulation zones. Stand back and stand by. We're going to dive into this bad boy. So ultimately, this proposal is to use government mechanisms that are already in place. So I guarantee you that anyone that falls more to the Ron Paul side of libertarian is not going to like this. We still value your input, and I really think you being involved in this process would help round it out and keep people honest, but you're not going to like any of this, just to warn you right up front. Sorry, libertarians. At least hear me out, though. You might like some ideas of it and just have a different way of getting it done. It's going to translate loosely to Trump's opportunity zones, but different, and it's in a lot of ways. It's not going to be focused on the inner cities, but it's going to actually shift that focus to small towns, use powers that we already have in place for affordable housing and increasing home ownership, which left-wingers and right-wingers both are concerned about these things. The reason I say this is because it'll benefit the right wing is because these areas tend to be more red now, these small towns and smaller districts. We see a lot of blue powerhouse cities, and then that's it. And then if you look at the county lineup, almost all counties in the United States go red, but it's all very small counties. And this influx of people that won't outpace the right-wing population in these areas, this growth of people will actually give these areas more power on a level based on how the state's power is divided up in districts and whatnot. It'll even out the vote in states a lot more. And I think that will benefit the right wing generally in some ways, and the left wing in other ways as well. But I really think this policy is something more that right wingers would like over left wingers. Though again, I try to reach out to both sides here. Again, yet Democrats pushing this housing and home owning bill will also satisfy many of their voters. Cheaper housing is for the better for all, and I believe Democrats would be on board with something that does that, even if it does benefit the GOP electorally a bit of ways as well, because this is something their constituents, housing is a big left-wing thing, something their constituents care about a bit more. So if they just concede this argument to the other side, then the other side gets those voters that view this as their first priority topic. So why small towns? Why not do this in cities? Cost of living. I'm going to go through a lot of the data here, but I'm not going to try to lead you. I don't want to lead you to where the pond I want you to drink out of. Kind of want you to go do your own research if you're going to try to rebuttal this. So I go state to state, but I really am going to focus a bit on California with most of my statistics, just because it was the easiest to find their data. So generally nationwide, we see the 600-foot square home costs anywhere from $50,000 to $70,000 on average to build, state to state, and that's generally if you're not building in bulk. That's if you want to go out and buy the materials and just build a single home. So $50,000 to $70,000. The cost here gets higher in some states, the more so in cities where factors see prices go up, like land, supplies, labor, fuel costs, and other fun stuff like that. If you move to a more rural area with less demand, pricing of many of those things drops, and in some ways substantially, depending on what you're comparing. So you get more bang for your buck. You save the buyers some money that they otherwise wouldn't, without pooling for large orders and resources, kind of what I was alluding to before. If you buy to build 100 homes, you get those resources for cheaper per pound, essentially. More bang for your buck. And we also see smaller businesses get larger, or businesses from the city expand to more rural areas that they otherwise wouldn't. So essentially, this is going to kind of promote competition and give more opportunities for businesses to expand. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later as well. This is more an introduction summary. So I have heard claims that many of these cities are overpopulated for much of their infrastructure that's currently in place, like public transportation, sewage. But I don't personally know the merits of that claim, and I kind of need to talk to somebody about that a bit more. The way I see it is, I don't see overpopulation of a city as something that damns a city unless the city cannot grow upward or outward anymore. I just see these as challenges that need to be solved. I don't think like overpopulation is going to be like, all right, nobody moved to New York City anymore. They just got to build more stuff. So I don't think this is the only way. I'm not going to give you my policy idea is the only way to solve this. I hate those types of politics. I just think it's a good idea. The reason why people go to the city is often to get into better jobs, get more education, be around people. Those are usually the big three we can see. And we can bring good jobs elsewhere by using mechanisms that we already have been used in other policies. Mechanisms that are already being used in other policies, it could be good for everyone. Last question. Why would the housing policy come from the GOP? When you ask the GOP about this, they don't really have great plans for housing besides deregulation generally. So it's not a massive issue to their voters as much, even though the price of housing is, building affordable housing to them isn't so much. So in the debate on this issue, it seems like they lack a stance and kind of lose the argument a bit generally on affordable housing. The stance of their this stance could be their platform on the issue, and it would promote some form of federalization that the GOP tends to lean towards. So if you don't know what federalism is, the term federalism is basically broken down really simply, is the dissection and use of powers between state, local, and federal government. And different views on federalism would say the federal government rules over all and has first or final say, and others would say state and local have more. And that's the right wing tends to side with the state and local a bit more often. Generally, you could find some anecdotes for that, but generally. And I feel like this policy would side generally with what the right wing likes to be their federalist stance. I just don't think delete zoning laws, LOL, look at Houston is a great argument for what the GOP essentially says now, boiled down to its basic argument. There's cities that, again, have to move upward, and I don't care what anyone says, nobody wants to buy an apartment. People don't even like living in apartments generally. Nobody wants to buy an apartment in a building they don't own. I also learned that when I moved to the south, there's a ton of homes that actually don't have basements. And the reason being is there is environmental structure issues, as well as the ground isn't, I don't know construction. The ground isn't good to have basements. There's a lot of flooding here. There's a lot of mudsliding here because I guess the makeup of the dirt and clay and whatnot. So we don't have a lot of basements here. We can't really grow up or down as well. We expand outward here because there's a lot of area. And I feel like this is kind of what inspired my idea to move cities outward. This is incentive to move these cities outward. So there are some concerns I want to address from both sides, as well as smaller groups and demographics that I want to hear out for in particular, and I'm going to get into each one as I do, but we will effectively be giving people who don't own homes, who struggle with the high cost of living in cities, to get a government loan for a home that they only pay about 1% interest on, plus inflation or deflation can change the overall cost of the loan. But they're not going to play it. They're only going to pay 1% interest. These are going to be the cheapest home loans around. The taxpayer is giving a 1% interest loan to young people mostly, and I'm going to jump into that. But there could be a credit score qualification for risk, and there's a lot of policies in place already for loans. And higher risk loans, you see a higher APR or interest rate or whatnot because of higher rates of default, and you don't want those loaning companies to go out of business for loaning out more money than they're actually taking back in. So you have to charge higher because more people are not going to pay you back. That could be worked into this policy, but I just don't know enough about it. I need somebody that does loans to speak with and kind of figure out those. There's a bit that still needs to be done here, as you can see. Leave a comment if you are that type of person. If you see me on Twitter, say, hey, I work in loans in a bank. I could tell you about how this process goes and blah, blah, blah. I used to sell cars and we would do in-house financing, so I know a bit of it, but I didn't work any of that in here. I want input from experts. Give me your expert opinion. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me what I could do better. I'm all ears. A concern for right-wingers is often if you move a large group of people to a different area, they often form small pocket communities, in some cases emulate some of the bad qualities of the areas they left. We see this with migrants a bit. You get a Chinatown and blah, blah, blah. And I think we need to at least address that and do some sort of assimilation with these small towns so the people that are there think this is progress, want to work with it. They don't feel like they're being taken over by a certain group of people that wasn't there prior, changing the fundamental makeup of their town. I want the townspeople that are going to be receiving all these people in jobs to also be accepting of these people and this change that they're going to see. They're going to see their town expand. A lot of them might like it, but some of them might not, and so we also need to cater to them as well. I have seen some competitive district laws from state to state that can be used as a basis for how we move people based on views. Yeah, so like competitive voting districts. And I also want competitive voting districts to be part of this policy proposal as well. Just a little down the line once the districts even out a little bit more. But we can use those to kind of assess different people's breakup and push different groups of people into the same area. I'm going to get into that a little bit when I want to address the Black community, because I have some questions for them as well that I need addressed in order to make this practical. We could also consider income levels as well, so we aren't sending 1,000 poor people to some city of 15,000, and we aren't sending all the rich people to live together. We want to see housing taxes kind of be not even across the board, but closer than they are now, so that schools get the same amount of funding and whatnot. I'm going to get into this more, and this is going to I'm going to touch on homeless people as well. The economically homeless are going to be the ones I address, the mentally ill, drug addicted, and things like that. The homeless people, because something's not right in their life or mind, those ones I'm not going to address here. It could be added into the policy, but I just don't feel like it has anything to do with what I'm talking about. I'm only going to talk about the economically homeless and like a first step program to get them back on their feet that makes the safety net act more as a spring than a trap. I'm sure somebody who has knowledge in these areas could maybe help me add some sort of clause for those other homeless people, but I just don't see how they fit in here, so I just left them out. Sorry. The general concern here I have with all this as well, and I think anyone can get behind this. Hold on. This would be where I need some help from someone in maybe economics or policy crafting, tax incentives to move businesses there, and coordinating with people's skill sets. Like if you have a certain firm moving into a certain area that you need people that have at least a baseline training, you could try to usher those people into that area, or we could do some sort of government teaching, and I'm going to get into all those as well. Again, just a general summary of some major concerns that I think need to be addressed. Similar to opportunity zones, but again in rural areas with more freedom to build and work and cheaper costs for things. I'm going to get into that with the cost section, but I talked above about assimilation. It's important to do this politically, but as well by using competitive districts, because the far left movements like defunding the police is something that wasn't very popular generally in the United States. That would never have any legs in a well-balanced government. If the equal right and left wing had their say, that wouldn't make it out of the debate phase, and if it did, it would be something that everybody would be happy with, and not a lot of right-wingers and independents were on board with defund the police. I don't even know if a majority of Democrats were by the end of that movement. I know that right-wingers were very against it. Most independents were against it as well. So we need these districts to be politically competitive so that things like that don't happen. I just picked defund the police. If you're a left-winger and you're angry about that, sorry. I could pick 100 policies, man. Just, chill. You have to go pretty far to one side to see a policy actually come into effect. And it's kind of driving businesses out of California. And I say we aim for maybe 20% of people who don't own homes in cities to be moved out of the cities, and it would also incentivize businesses in these oversaturated markets in these cities to consider moving as well, and we're going to get to them in the cost section a bit, because right now a lot of these rural areas just have such small demand levels that it's not worth it for a lot of businesses to go there. It's not worth it for high-speed internet to go there. So we see the government having to step in and help put high speed in these rural areas where we could do this and we would just be able to rely on the market, because there'd be more opportunity for different sectors to reach out into these rural areas. We're right now packed in the cities a bit more, I think, than we've ever been. And again, I'm not saying that's something that can't be solved. I just think that we could go a different way and still be good for people. I do think, we could get by the way we are now, absolutely. But it would also help cities, because it seems that the cost of rent in certain areas is driven up due to high demand but lack of ability to build more housing for whatever reasons, zoning laws, geological reasons. But people don't want to live in apartment buildings, especially they don't want to own them. I don't care what anyone thinks. People want to own their own home. And we see that, like 66% of people own their own home right now, and more want to. They're saying they're unable to due to economic reasons, or blaming the last generation, or whatever. Working remotely has changed the game also, and we see states like West Virginia actually offering people rewards as tax benefits, or I think I saw one that was just a flat cash payment. So you'll move there and pay taxes there, but you won't actually be working in the state. That's also something we could take into consideration here, but I don't think those people would, I don't know. I mean, it would just be having to transfer less jobs than people to these areas. It'd be better for bigger firms that actually can support a lot of remote work too. We could also use some sort of training for young adults in a multitude of forms, government training, or the government could pay a third party that has interest, like a business that needs a particular skill in workers. Government could pay them to do the training. Here's some extra money. Take a bunch of young people that are brand new homeowners and give them that training they need, and we're going to pay you out of the government dime to do that. And take this risk on these people and train them up and get them in these jobs that they'll be able to work for and pay off these new housing loans and actually benefit all the society. This is incentivizing home ownership. Teach young people about financial management and budgeting and new skills. This is a big one that always is overworked. New skills as a homeowner, like basic maintenance to your home, your AC unit. I'm in my 30s and I really recently had to learn how to maintain an AC unit because of these, like this situation change, and Like you don't learn these skills anywhere. You just got to kind of pick them up, and YouTube's great, but we could teach people these things so they go into this with confidence and don't have to. I love research and learning things, and not everybody's, it intimidates some people. So we can offer classes and teach them, and that could be funded by the government again and done by the third party that has interest. But if there's no interest, like you don't make anything for teaching people how to do basic home maintenance, so the government could run that one and let people take polls or what do you need to learn? I need to learn how to do my taxes better. Okay, the government could offer these courses to these people that do that through this policy if we did this properly. So if we have competitive political districts as well, we could also teach people how to get involved in their local politics through the government. And that's a little bit of a contentious issue because whoever's in charge of the government at the time might have a little more say over what those classes offer. And when one political party gets into power, they try to use whatever mechanisms they can to put their party on top, which I understand. I don't like some of their actions sometimes, but I understand that's what they're trying to do. And so maybe a little less government involvement in some of those classes, especially the ones where running for government is involved. But maybe we could pay the Republican and Democratic Party a little bit of federal money to teach their own future politicians in these local areas how to rise to prominence and run for office and whatnot. That would be another idea as well. Again, I have no data on a lot of this. I'm just kind of riffing, throwing out ideas, getting your mind going. Maybe you think of something I didn't. Maybe you think of a new idea or something at some point that kind of rejects one of mine that I didn't. Feel free. So I'm going to jump into everyone's favorite subject to talk about now, which is race. And this is one of those smaller demographics I wanted to get into. I want to talk about the potential pushback from the black community generally. And it's more the left of center black community, but that tends to be most black voters. So this won't be addressed to people that side with Larry Elder or Thomas Sowell. Not that their personal opinions don't matter. They just represent a very small percentage of the black community, and I really feel like, if I talk more to black left of center people, I'll be addressing more of the black vote. So if meeting Thomas Sowell and being able to propose this policy idea to him and have him tear it apart would be probably one of the highest honors of my life. It's not that his views don't matter, but it just don't matter in terms of addressing the black community on these particular subjects. That's all. I really respect the dude, but the black community uniquely is much more in racial solidarity than pretty much any other racial demographic in the United States, and I could see that resulting in pushback in the assimilation argument into dividing these communities up and not making a small town feel like an influx of 1,000 people that type of person wasn't there before. It could just cause some problems. They wouldn't want to see the community that they grew up in have such a drastic change, and I could see just breaking up communities affect the black community. So I kind of want to ask about that. Now, for the middle and upper class black families, this doesn't seem to be as big of an issue. In places like, I live in the South, in places like Georgia, the Jim Crow South, for a few decades back, they pushed a lot of these programs. I see in my own life that these diversity programs of old actually did a lot of work for communities today, and now we have these very unsegregated, integrated communities in the South, and it works fantastic. But when I was from the North, there was a black neighborhood, there was a white neighborhood in New York, and it's less like that in the South, surprisingly. Yet just because it works in the long run does not naturally justify forcing this policy on anyone. And I would like to hear the left-wing blacks community to address kind of that point. Why do black people gravitate towards cities more often than white people, it looks like? Is there a community-driven reason behind that? Is there something else that I don't know? Something that I should work into this policy to make it appeal more to the black community? Just tell me, please. I'm all ears. Rural breakdowns tend to be drastically more white, despite the lower cost of living, and this plan isn't exactly moving people to rural areas, but it could be seen as that in its early forms when these towns haven't grown to their full potential yet. I'm going to get into their full potential when I start to get into a couple studies I looked at about people's ideal living situations. So how do I sell this to black voters? Is it messaging, or is it on the policy level? Do I need to do something differently? Specifically, the 16% of black people in poverty that this plan would arguably stand to benefit the most, but I feel like would also give the most pushback because of that assimilation argument. What do you think? Please tell me. I'm all ears. I grew up in the North, but it was actually a really racially diverse place. It wasn't as big black and white communities, so I don't know. I'm just, fill me in. I want to also touch on poverty as a whole, and I want to specifically get into entitlement programs that we can tap into, but I'm going to get into those a little later in the cost section, as what I want to hit on for poverty here is because poverty disproportionately affects the black community a bit more. If you aren't aware, about 11% of the United States is generally in poverty at any given time, but that number for the black community is sitting at 16 to 17% right now, which is drastically higher, almost double. 50% higher is huge. So, this community is affected by poverty more, so I feel like I need to address that if I'm going to address poverty. In my video debunking 52% of black people committing 13% of murders, I dive into a couple statistics on poverty, and from that video I proved it there. We could find that 54% of people see poverty for at least a year in the United States, but that very same data set shows us that 73% of people actually make it to the top 20% of income earners for at least a year. I think it's 43% to top 10%, and like 15% to the top 1% for at least a year. So that's a huge amount of economic mobility in the United States, and it shows me, like, if you dig a little deeper, which I do in that video, why people see that drastic of poverty and then that drastic of growth to the top 20%. A lot of it has to do with age, and as you get older, you get more job experience, you gain more knowledge, you gain more education, and you can actually ask for money because your marketable skills are higher. So we also see, I got into this in that other video as well, we also see the vast majority of black Americans who are in the middle class are up, but since the demographic has been repopulating close to 20% higher than its demographic percentage of the United States population, and whites have been repopulating 20 to 40% lower, that this is a younger demographic by far. That you can't compare the black and white demographic one-to-one because white people's mean, median, and mode age is higher. I think the median age for white people is 41. The most common age is 56. Whereas for black people, the most common age is in the 20s, and the median age is in the 30s. So we see a lot more younger black people, which means a lot more black poverty, which means a lot more black crime. Most crime, if you didn't know, is committed by young men, generally in poverty between the ages of 15 and 29, I think it was. In that area roughly. So any demographic that has a higher percentage of young men in that financial, socioeconomic, and socioeconomic status and age group will see more crime. It's just kind of common sense. So I don't think it really closes the gap fully. I think there are some cultural issues as well, but watch that video if you care about that argument. I'm not making it here. I'm just giving you some of the data I discovered in it. So also, depending on how you define white, there's a lot of different ways. I want to make my argument apply to several different arguments, so that's why I use such a broad range. White people are repopulating 20 to 40% lower than their demographic percentage, because depending on how you define white, the demographic percentage of white people goes from like either 60 to 75%, somewhere in there. Thus, this demo is more likely to have lower rates of home ownership, higher rates of poverty, and I can argue that this community would benefit the most from this plan in the short term due to their age and home ownership rates, and they would also benefit more in the long term, building generational wealth and equity, which is a big thing you see in the black community. Something they want to work on with black people is building generational wealth. Well, the best way to do that is start building your equity in a affordable housing home ownership program is what I'm offering. A problem I see here, though, is that marital rates in the black community. So you'll hear a right-wing talking point that like 74% of households don't have a father in the home, and they base it off of marriage statistics because for some reason this argument grants this idea that if there's no marriage, there's no father in the home. And it's actually not true. I've seen other studies say that the black community actually has very high rates of fatherhood, a father figure in the home of some sort, even if it's not the birth father. There just lacks the formal marriage a lot of the times. So I don't think it's as bad as right-wingers make it sound, but it is still not great. And it also it makes difficulties due to lending out loans. What you see in the statistics is married couples tend to take out and pay back their loans at higher rates than non-married people by quite a bit. So in order to get the lower risk loans, marriage is probably a factor. I'm not 100%, so I'm not going to say definitely, but probably a pretty large factor in getting a better rate. So we may have to address this somehow for the black community. I think in other loans it has been addressed. Like if you have two income earners, it doesn't matter if they're married or not when you're getting a loan, as long as they're maybe a co-signer or something. So I don't know. There's probably some loan laws to get around this problem. I just want to make sure it's addressed, is all. It's just why I bring it up. Now I want to dip into a few studies, and I'm not going to cite them intentionally. So why would I do that? Because I hate giving you information? No. All I'm doing here is talking. So that's literally all I'm doing is giving you information. I don't want to lead you. I don't want to lead you to the argument I'm trying to give. I want to give you enough of the argument to know what I'm saying, but not enough for you to kind of follow my path of logic and just agree with me. I want you to disagree. I need you to. I need you to sharpen my sword. So the goal here is maybe give some ideas on how to sell this to the people and structure this plan and how people would best enjoy it. That's what I was looking at when I was pulling. What's the ideal living situation? So I can kind of structure my ideas around that. And I picked out a couple studies, but maybe you'll find a study that tells you something different, and you'll restructure these ideas in a little bit different of a way, and that's absolutely perfect. So from some of the data I have seen, the ideal living situation is not too rural and not too dense, and there is a point where the desired circumstances start to fall off and it gets too large. So you'll see like traffic congestion, pollution, dealing with people, mass crowding, and the biggest factor is cost of living increases. These are what see the ideal living situation start to fall off when population density gets too high. Often sees, cost of living. But one of these demands raises in a smaller area, the demand raises in a smaller area because by the nature of density, we have more packed into us. Okay. Now, the goal here is to aim a bit for the sweet spot, essentially. We want to go a little bit below the sweet spot of population density because we want more people to move to more people are going to want to move to these areas if there's a job that they want to get or something. They're going to move on their own. They're going to find a house maybe that's already built or an apartment or something like that. So we want to allow for the natural migration of people voting with their feet or whatever. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean for that drink. The goal here is aim right below the sweet spot. I also have this also has to account for young people that are seeking opportunity, that maybe didn't get the house. So the reason young people leave their hometown sometimes is the big city, good jobs, education, excitement. We need to bring that feel to some of these towns, and a lot of it's going to happen through an organic free market process, but that's the goal, is to try to make these smaller towns basically a small city that's entertaining enough to keep the youth from wanting to go run off to New York City and start their acting career. We gotta maybe push in some way for entertainment, maybe sports teams. Maybe we start smaller leagues of sports teams when some of these areas get a little bigger. But we also don't want to micromanage it. A lot of it's going to have to be the market. We're just going to, what the government can do to not micromanage but still aid is subsidize. It's a very common tactic, and it helps. It doesn't solve the problem, but it helps. Another convincing talking point for the less authoritarian people probably would be the COVID example. So you see a lot of smaller towns, red and purple areas did not lock down for COVID nearly as much as the blue areas. And now a couple of years later, where people's opinions on lockdown generally are turning, wasn't a great idea. My sister's big on the left. She was telling me she regrets some of the actions she took under lockdown, caused her a lot of personal stress, and family members of mine that don't live in Georgia with me agreed, but I lived here. It was great. I didn't we didn't lock down that much. They trusted adults to be adults, and you saw a lot of smaller areas did things like that. Like, obviously some common sense measures were put in place, but like, they didn't mandate anything on you. And then, they would see getting more of these purple areas would see more common sense policy that works for more people like that. And I don't like red or blue strongholds where ideological views get pushed more than they would when something's fair and balanced. So, to finish this point off before we go to costs, I just want to say again that I looked at these studies to best figure out the guidelines for kind of how I want to craft this policy, and I'm open to different conclusions, and I will flip on a dime if you can offer me a better argument that still fits within my parameters and principles of this legislation. And I hear a lot of YouTubers say this is a conversation, leave a comment, and then you look at the comments and they address maybe 2 people, ignore the rest. I will answer every single one of you as long as you're arguing in good faith. And if you're not, I'll still tell you to F off. But like, unless it gets too big at some point, unless I blow up to a point where I just physically can't, I am here literally just to hear your counter arguments and argue back. So finally, I want to talk about costs. If you're a libertarian with zero room to wiggle on anything, and you just think ANCAP libertarian, you think no government at all, you're going to hate this part the most. But for the 99% of us that vote for the one of the 2 major parties, we accept that government functions in this way, and we just disagree on how much or little they should, how much intervention or how little they should. So let's start talking about the money that already exists in budgets and how we can kind of push it around. This part I feel is we're trying to reach out to economists and people in government to chat with, and I've had some success. One guy's waiting for me to finish this video so I can email it to an economist so he can mill through it, get his arguments together, and blow it apart, and I'm thankful. But I keep reaching out to people, and I just don't have any clout or views or followers, so there's no reason for anyone that's not passionate to answer, unless you're passionate about something like this. What do you get from it? So I get it. I'm not judging or anything, and that's the only reason I kind of want some subscribers, is to just pull in bigger names and get some better ideas, more names. I have no idea how to form this into actual policy at the end of the day, and so I'm going to need a ton of help along all those lines. And this kind of is a video proposal to get that out there and get some people here to chat with me and kind of work through this. When I get some feedback, I'll start a Discord server. So for cost, I want to talk about the loan program a little bit more in depth, and I alluded to the basic talking points of it. But in a perfect world where everyone pays their loan back on time, I would say a 1% interest is perfect. We don't want the government to really make money off of this, but pay all expenses and then 1% interest, as well as raising or lowering the cost of this home for inflation/deflation to make the amount the taxpayer pay get slightly. I want the taxpayer to just get a little bit back, extra, but not much. Now, that's a risk assessment thing, and again, if we wanted to jump into higher risk loans, we could jump into a 5% APR instead of 1% and whatnot, and what things would qualify somebody for a higher risk loan, or all sorts of other mechanisms and techniques we already have in place now that would be important to push. I want to also push these things on young people, like get some education about paying bills and not going into debt and getting your good, decent credit, and et cetera, et cetera. I feel a lot of young people automatically are considered a high-risk loan just because they haven't built any credit yet. So maybe in some of these areas we could even aim for educating on a high school, middle school, high school level financial management as well, just to kind of get people more prepared. But again, I'm saying offer these classes to full-on adults too. Teach people these things, because a lot of them are just ignorant. Most people, you teach them in good faith and they'll listen. So the idea of moving people to rural areas instead of populated cities to incentivize cheaper housing. And I kind of justify this with cost of living. So I'm going to dive into some data real quick, and it's boring, it sucks, whatever. LA County is 40 to 50% higher than the national average in terms of cost of living. And Essex County, and also in California, is about 1 to 2% higher cost of living. And that's huge. It's a huge gap between the two. I want to take advantage of this gap But I also realize the more we take advantage of this gap, or just comparing two different districts, you're going to see that gap close substantially. For most, I'm kind of being hyperbolic by selecting these two ranges. Most aren't going to be that much, so there has to be some sort of algorithmic method process in place to account for different gaps in cost of living. Obviously, if like the gap in cost of living is only 10%, you're going to see less houses built. I mean, less money to throw around for this, and thus less houses built. But at the end of the day, all that money should be paid back in a perfect world by the person paying the loan. We could also see loan costs go down with a bigger gap too. So just keeping these two counties as an example, the cost of a home in Essex County is roughly a third of the cost of a home on average in LA County, 300,000 and 100,000 respectively. And that might have to do with other things. It's a cherry-picked statistic. We probably have more rich people living in LA County, and that could contribute to why the cost of a home is a bit higher there. But cost of living is a factor in that, obviously. Essex County also sees gasoline prices over $1 cheaper, and I would guess the material costs for goods and work and services from local firms is higher. But again, I know Democrats are big on union work, so union work's expensive. It often yields higher quality results, but it's also really expensive and moves much slower. So right-to-work states may see a higher advantage with this policy just because they allow people to do jobs without being in unions, speeding them up. And making them cheaper. So that's something that would lean to this being more of a right-wing policy, because it's not the most pro-union friendly, but unions could be worked in here somehow. It would just raise the cost a bit though. Some funding we can shift around are funds being spent on housing for the homeless, just the economically homeless. Now, I don't know what percent of the homeless are specifically economically homeless, but I gave several options above on how we can help educate people in school and once they get these homes, so that funding can be taken away. And also for funding for the cost of paying this could come out of your payroll tax, if hypothetically, if you wanted, and you wouldn't even have to pay your house bill. It could just come out of your wages. That's it. And if you don't get the house, maybe you get it all back minus what it costs to fix the house up, instead of like a bank mortgage where like I can't pay my mortgage anymore, it's been 10 years, they just keep all the money you gave them. In this case, you could get all that money back except what it costs to fix the house back up to what it was before you got it. That would be cool. I could also see a percentage of people that are homeless vets, and if that's the case, homeless vets being housed, we could tap into some VA funds. We could tap into homeless funds for these houses and get these economically homeless people off on their feet. And again, it would be a way to do it in a way that's the safety net would act as a spring net and not a trap net, which in ways, like, what I mean by that is currently if there's certain welfare programs and certain entitlement programs that when you get on them, it's hard to get off of them, because once you buy a car, your personal individual wealth went up to a point where you no longer could afford or no longer get qualified for that level of food stamps. So it's actually worth it for you to never buy a car, because you're saving more in food stamps than you are paying for transportation like a bus. And it acts as a trap. So this would counteract that in a way. California has $8 billion in spending on homeless people. So if we did get these economically homeless into houses, we could tap into some of that $8 billion hypothetically and use that to help these people get back on their feet in a way that they actually benefit. Like, they actually have their own home. They actually have some real long-term equity in their name and not just can pay their bills and eat. So, and again, we could train them on how to responsibly manage their finances as well, and get these people on the right path. Poor people that have good intentions and just can't figure it out. I really feel like we could address that in this policy, in a right-wing policy. And it would give the right wing a lot of ground on these topics. Hold up. So we could also look at the rent assistance programs. And I'm not saying completely end them, But maybe in the long term, we could drastically cut back these rent assistance programs, because a lot of people that would be renting would now be being pushed out of these expensive areas where they rent into ownership, where it might even be cheaper for them to pay a mortgage, and they'll have a good job there that we're also setting up in this policy, so they won't need the assistance nearly as much. So we could divert some rent assistance into this program. Not sure how much. And I also see that if we're taking 20 people out of the cities, hypothetically, the demand for housing in the cities is going to go down, lowering the rent in the cities, and less people would need rent assistance in the city. So you could see a drastic decrease in the need for rent assistance just with this program. So a lot of those funds could be diverted to this. Maybe not immediately, but over time. Programs like mortgage assistance and first-time home ownership programs could be completely eliminated and worked into this policy. If you're a first-time homeowner, you're getting a 1% instead of a 3%. I think that's the down payment. I think the down payment was 3% of the total cost. I don't remember exactly what, but we could eliminate those and work those ideas into this policy, and all that funding that goes to mortgage assistance and homeowner programs, boom, it's in this thing. So, you just got funding being pumped into this policy that is already out there in the ether, and maybe even save some money, maybe even pay less overall by doing something like this. I don't know. I don't have all the factors mapped out enough to even start doing the math yet. But yeah, so these programs also could be folded in as well, if not eliminated. We could leave them in place and kind of fold them into the policy. And political minds, especially with some history on the healthcare sector, will know that over the last 70 years, we've had a couple massive bills that just kind of stack on top of each other, and they have to sort of be ironed out to work together. So we have done this in the past, and it'd be much easier to do with these much simpler policies than healthcare. Healthcare is extremely complicated. Now, I need to talk about the business side a little bit on the cost metrics. So if you build a bunch of houses, but there's nowhere to work in the area, people aren't going to be able to pay their bills. You're going to stress that area out. So what do? You wait for the market to say, hey, we need more employment here. And then people move their firms there where the people is, so they can get people to work at these jobs. And we can incentivize that. So we already do this in all 50 states, if I'm not mistaken, tax incentivization. And we could even structure it to kind of prefer small businesses instead of larger firms. Not saying we want to exclude Walmarts, because Walmarts are let me explain the tax incentive things first. So we could do preferential treatment of smaller businesses. If you're opening your third location in this small city, it's a little bit of a risk because you're using these programs, incentives to do it. We could give you maybe a little bit of an extra incentive because you're a small business and it's harder for you to spend this money to open this new business. So you can kind of pay for a little bit of it, and then you might, the taxes resulting from this will pay itself off in 20 years. Or maybe you pay that, it's like a loan that you pay back in a 1% interest or something like that. So we could do something to help out these smaller businesses and not offer them as much to bigger businesses, because we want small mom and pop shops that can compete. That being said, we don't want to cut off the Walmarts and the Amazons and these bigger companies, because in a way, these companies are viewed as a status symbol. There's a South Park episode about them getting a Whole Foods in Soda Sopa to show how progressive they were. But realistically, if a town has some of these bigger areas, it tells people that aren't from this town that this might be a place worth moving to, because it's developed to this point. If you have a university there, if you have, everyone's played SimCity, if you have certain things in your town, it makes your town more desirable for more people. So you don't want to completely isolate these big firms, even if you're not a big fan of them and you like competition or you don't like big corporations. You still need some of them because they act as a status symbol for your city. Okay, so there apparently have been allegations of exploitation of the opportunity zones by some investors and whatnot, and I haven't looked into it enough to know if these are merit-based claims or partisan attacks just to not give Trump any credit for anything. I have seen, some bad faith actors mention them, but I've seen a couple people I like on the left also mention there has been some corruption in the opportunity zone, so I think that's going to need to be looked into and addressed as well if it does have some legs to it. I think the easiest problem in terms of cost, because we already do this today and states actively use it as selective taxation. I was just talking about that. States already use that as a form of competition to attract businesses there. Amazon and AOC, everyone remembers when she got pissed off that New York was going to lower their taxes for Amazon to get them to come and build a plant or something in New York. and people were talking about how she ruined jobs and blah 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 and this and that. There's some merit to that argument, and in the sense that like you could lower your taxes to get some firms in there, and again we can cater to smaller businesses. That would be cool. The argument that can be made that the lower cost of living allows these firms to pay the local workers lower wages than they have to pay somebody in the city at a higher cost of living. Somebody in Seattle can make a very good argument for $15 an hour minimum wage, but somebody in rural Georgia can't so much because the cost of living there is significantly lower. To do this low risk thing that you might... Oh yeah, so to convince businesses to come here to do this low risk, it's a low risk transfer to this community. We're going to give you tax incentives. We're going to give you money. You're going to save money. We're going to give you loans, low interest loans if you're a small business, to come here and build your firm in this small town where we guarantee you people are going to show up into once these houses are done. And we offer these people these houses. So please move your business here. You're going to save money. You're going to save more money. You're also going to get a good reputation in a smaller, more isolated market. Where do you sign? Like, if you could sell this to business owners so well. We're going to give you a government loan at a 1% interest rate just to help you expand your business into this community that we're also trying to grow. I think that would be fantastic for small businesses. So my conclusion here, I think that that is everything I have on this specific topic and proposal, and all the things I need to work on. But to get into the ether of your brains and get it cooking, I want you to cook on this. I want you to debunk me. I want you to agree with me where you think I need more work and you think I need to double down more. I have yet to hear any other policy proposal that is specifically like this, even though I could name a lot of policy proposals that are similar that we're going to emulate in certain ways, like I explained above. So a lot of people here are thinking this is a planned economy, and how do we essentially make a planned economy without actually having a planned economy, with relying on the actual market to jurisdict the economy? And how do we set up people to move out of the city location they have at their free will? Well, we already do that. We just need to harness these mechanisms in place, like cash incentive, home ownership incentive, housing, cheaper housings and such. And I also want to tap into policy and politics like that. Like, again, cheaper housing and homelessness for the left, but the right, the federalization argument for the right wing and getting people out of these democratic strongholds in terms of the political argument for the right wing, I think are really good ones. As well, the right wing cares about home ownership and affordable housing and a better economy. I feel like this really addresses a lot of questions and problems I hear around housing in the United States, as well as gives both sides a lot of red meat to their base that they'll be happy about. I hope I provided enough information to steer you in the direction I'm going, but not steer you too hard that you won't be able to think outside the box, or I don't want to lead you too much. So thanks for listening. Take it easy. I hope to hear from every single one of you.